Hi and welcome to my channel. I'm Mark on RC 74. In today's video I'm gonna show you the transformation of my carbon cup cowling from the stock cowling, which looks like this, and the little plastic spinner. The transformation to what you can see here, my carbon cowling, which is built as close as possible to full-scale Scrappy's carbon cowling, including the shape of the spinner, which is way longer than the stock spinner of the Horizon carbon cup. I will go through all the details. In the last video I showed you how I made the foam and cardboard template. In this video I'm gonna go through all the steps from the finished template to the finished carbon cowling, as you can see it here. Before I was able to start with the carbon work on the template, I had to increase the holes with my Dremel tool just to give the carbon fiber a little more space, just to make sure the carbon fiber keeps in place when I wrap it around these sharp edges. To make the handling possible on the template, I had to drill a hole from the backside into the template and put a fiberglass rod into it, so I was able to put on the template on its back, make it possible to spin it around, to work from every side without putting it down on the table. So like this, I hope to make the work with the carbon fiber on the template as easy as possible. For this part I also used the wrapping technique, which I learned from Easy Composites, which is a great YouTube channel all about carbon fiber. For this I had to first cover the whole template with 24-hour epoxy, let it cure for around 6 to 8 hours, depends on your epoxy, room temperature and so on. Then wrapped the whole carbon fiber around the template. That was pretty tricky because the target was to wrap the whole part with one piece of carbon fiber. So there were some spots where the carbon fiber had some little gaps, but in the end I think the result looks pretty good. Then I let the epoxy completely cure for at least these 24 hours. Then it was time to put on the first layer of epoxy to soak up the whole epoxy into the carbon fiber, to give the carbon fiber the strength to go on with the work on the carbon fiber. To make the round shape on the front end of the cowling, I used a cap which perfectly fitted in diameter, put it in some Vaseline, put the cap onto the front end of the cowling, of the center part, and like this I got a pretty nice round shape. The carbon fiber stayed in the edges of the shape of the cowling, so the result of this one layer was pretty perfect. The target was also to only make one layer just because of the weight of the cowling. I wanted to keep the cowling as light as possible, so there's only one layer of carbon fiber on the whole cowling. After the first layer of epoxy was completely cured and soaked up by the carbon fiber, I began to work on the shape, so cut off some carbon fiber excess with a scissor. Had to clean the Vaseline from the carbon fiber, so I needed some dishwash liquid to clean the Vaseline from the carbon. Then on the lower side of the cowling there was a seam. I tried to make the seam invisible, which went out absolutely perfect. On the finished cowling you cannot see anything of the seam. But after wrapping, there was a massive seam of the two ends of the carbon fiber which come together. So I had to sand down all this excess, this whole seam, to make this absolutely flat. For the raw shaping, I always used 80 grit sandpaper, which works pretty perfect for the raw shaping. If you want to do little corrections, it's 120 or 240. Then I went on with the front. I shaped the air intake, the raw shape with Dremel tool on both sides. Also on the center part, I cutted the hole for the motor shaft and sanded the center part flat with a flat piece of wood and also 80 grit sandpaper, and sanded the front end to an absolutely even surface so the spinner will fit perfect onto the front end. Because of the not absolutely perfect wrapping of the carbon fiber, I had some little carbon fiber gaps, especially in the tricky parts of the cowling on the front end of the air intakes. So I took some little carbon fiber parts and put them onto the areas where I had some gaps. Took 24-hour epoxy, let it cure, sanded the whole carbon fiber and the epoxy down to the right shape. And like this I was able to close the biggest gaps in the carbon fiber. Then I took my Dremel and the cutting disc to cut out the bottom part of the carbon fiber from the air intake, so the air intakes are the first time really open, and cut all that stuff out. That was pretty hard work to get this stuff out because it was completely glued with 24-hour epoxy onto the foam template. Then I added 4 more layers of epoxy, so the steps were putting on epoxy, let it cure for at least 24 hours, sand it down with 120 or 80 grit sandpaper, put another layer on it, sand it down, and the whole process for 4 times. Like this I got a pretty nice surface, no more structure of the carbon fiber on the surface, so the finish looked pretty nice. On one layer of epoxy I messed up, or I think I messed up with mixing the epoxy not long enough. So the result was that there were some milky shadows on the surface of the carbon cowling. First idea was to have the whole carbon fiber cowling with visible carbon fiber, but when I saw these milky shadows, that didn't look really great. So I decided to paint the cowling, and even only with filler on it, like you can see it now, I think it makes sense to paint the carbon cowling anyways. I will do some small parts which I add on later. I will do them in visible carbon fiber, but the whole cowling will be painted in the end. Then I removed more excess from carbon fiber from the edges of the back end of the cowling and began to take out some foam templates, but because the cowling is that long and I cannot dig the whole foam out of the cowling, I took my drill, took a 13mm drill, drilled a lot of holes from the back side and also from the front side through the center hole and through the air intakes. And through all these holes I was able to pour in some thinner, and the thinner dissolves the foam. So like this the foam was really soft, and then I was able to pull out the whole foam and cardboard templates. It was a big mess, but it worked, and with the final result after some cleaning of the inside of the cowling, I was pretty happy how I was able to pull out the whole stuff, the whole template out of the cowling. For a first fit check of the carbon cowling, I had to cut off some foam of the stock cowling. After cutting off the foam, I was able to put on the cowling for the first time, and I was really surprised. I'm really happy. The cowling fits onto the fuselage like a glove. The shape of the template was absolutely perfect. It's only put on the fuselage, it's not screwed on already. The steps with the cowling mounts and all that stuff will follow in the next video. Then I removed the motor from the stock motor mount. Also had to remove the battery mount inside the fuselage just to get access to the screws which will keep the spacers for the custom motor mount together. To make these screws fit and the spacers fit, I had to drill out the holes, which are I think around 2.5 millimeter stock, drilled out to 3 millimeter to make the M3 screws fit without any issues and make it easy to put on the provisoric spacers to check the motor position. Then I ordered some nice 40 millimeter spacers, which I installed later. To give the cowling a little more space, I had to remove even more foam from the stock cowling. I will later try to remove even more foam just to reduce the weight. Every foam piece which is inside the cowling and doesn't carry the motor isn't necessary. Then I did a fit check with the motor on the correct position installed and the spinner installed for the first time. Figured out that I had an issue with the angle, the center front end of the cowling. This didn't match with the angle of the end plate of the spinner. So that meant I had to do much more work on the front end of the cowling. I had to rebuild the whole air intakes, the whole center part to make everything look nice and clean again. I decided to use the same technique as for the whole template for the cowling. So I sanded a centerpiece, a round centerpiece into the right angle, and also shaped and cutted 2 pieces of foam which I glued onto the air intakes, sanded all these parts down to the right shape, did a fit check if the angle is correct, if everything looks okay, and then I added again some 24-hour epoxy, let it cure for a few hours, put it on all the carbon fiber I need to reshape the front end, fixed everything with some tape to keep the carbon fiber in place as good as possible. Then removed the tape again after the epoxy was completely cured. Then I had to do the same process again for the front end, like on the whole cowling. Soak up the carbon fiber after curing of the sticky epoxy layer to soak up the added carbon fiber, soak it up with 24-hour epoxy, let it cure for 1 day at least, sand it all down to the right shape. Then I also had some issues with little strange gaps which didn't look really nice. I decided to fill them up with 10-minute epoxy. You can put a thicker layer of 10-minute epoxy onto a gap which has not the right shape in comparison to 24-hour epoxy, which is way thinner. Sanded all the epoxy down and then put it a final 24-hour epoxy layer on the whole cowling. Also sanded it down with wet sanding and 120 grit sandpaper to the shape you can see now. And for the final step on the cowling, I put it on some filler on the whole carbon structure and the dark color of the carbon fiber. You cannot see really well all the imperfections you have on a carbon fiber part. It's pretty tricky. So if you put on the filler, this makes the surface way brighter and even color on the surface. And that helps you to show all the little details which are not okay yet. So there are some, and I will do the final corrections on a later step of the whole paint build. Meanwhile, I got the 40mm spacers I ordered and also a custom part from a local supporter for installation of the prop and spinner. So I was able to take off the provisoric spacers, put it on the final spacers, so the final position of the motor was done like this, and installed the whole spinner for the first time. This custom part for the propeller. I love it because I can screw on the prop, and at the same time it's also M4 thread inside, which helps to install the spinner nose on the back plate. So there's one piece for all the installation of spinner and prop, and like this it's really clean and lightweight. And I'm really happy about the results so far. I like the look of the plane. The cowling is not finished yet because full-scale Scrappy has also some air intakes and air outlets on the cowling, and these are one of the next steps I will do on this plane. These steps will follow in the next video. Also the whole screw mounts for the cowling and some more detail work on the fuselage. This is it for today's video. Thanks a lot for watching. See you in the next one. Have a good time. Bye bye.